In 1986, Oregon Episcopal School, a small private school in the Portland area, ran Basecamp, an outdoor educational program for all 10th graders. The program required them to climb the Mount Hood, Oregon's highest mountain and the fourth highest in the Cascade Range. On May 11, 1986, 15 students gathered on the campus to prepare for the outdoor expedition. Led by Thomas Goman, the school's chaplain, the expedition is to set off from Timberline Lodge. They hope to reach the summit of Mount Hood, 11,249 feet above sea level. They climbed onto a school bus, carrying their heavy gear, down the narrow aisle, and took their seats. They started the 90-minute bus trip to Timberline Lodge. The party consisted of 20 people, 15 students, Sharon, a student's mother, Thomas Goman, Dean of Students Marion Horwell, and 2 guides, Zduniak and Ralph Summers. The bus reached the base of the mountain. They were issued ice axes and helmets at Timberline Lodge and also carried compasses and a shovel for digging through ice-crusted snow. The group left Timberline Lodge at 2:30 a.m., facing above freezing temperatures and calf-deep snow at 6,000 feet near the tree line. They walked a 6-mile round trip quietly through a hushed darkness, accompanied by the muffled sound of their footsteps, as they moved quietly through the icy terrain. On that day, the weather forecast for Mount Hood was grim. A multi-day storm with strong winds and a surge of marine moisture was forecasted by weather services. Goman thought even in the event of severe weather, they can reach the summit safely. The weather and visibility were still fairly mild as dawn approached. But some started to doubt their decision to continue. Hillary and Sharon were the first to leave the climb. Despite being pushed to continue, Hillary did not feel well. So she and her daughter left. 2 more students left at 7,000-foot warming station, Silcox Hut. Lorca Smetana, suffering from cramps, asked if she could leave. Goman agreed. Even in bad weather, the route down from Silcox is easy to follow. Also, 16-year-old Courtney Boatsman had a weird, nagging feeling she should get off the mountain. Eventually, Lorca and Courtney made their way back to the lodge. A few hours later, 2 other climbers would leave, John Whitson, who was sick with indigestion, and Michael Garrett, who accompanied him. At around 11:30 a.m. Zduniak, suffering from mild snow blindness, decided to head down, reducing the group size to just 13. At last, around 2 p.m., with all of them above 11,000 feet and strong winds, Summers managed to persuade Goman to reconsider. Summers had ventured forward by himself for 30 or 40 feet and observed that the circumstances were just too unstable. However, it was already too late. The storm had arrived. Meanwhile, the 4 students who left the climb hanged around at the lodge, occasionally going outside to view their classmates in steady ascent. At 3:30 p.m., clouds suddenly started moving in really fast, and by 3:45 p.m., they couldn't see anything on the mountain. By now, the group had descended several hundred feet and were huddled together. The climbers would have been visible from Timberline Lodge on a clear day as black dots on the surface of Mount Hood. But it was only 20 to 30 feet visible now. The youngest climber, 15-year-old Patrick McGinnis, began to struggle in the cold. He started speaking slurred about 3:30 p.m. He stumbled and fell. Students put him in the lone sleeping bag in the group. Senior Susan McClave pulled off her boots and jacket and crawled inside to warm him up. Summers ignited the burner on his field stove and bringing the water to a boil, where he dissolved 2 lemon drops. After taking McGinnis's temperature, Summers gave him a 12-ounce serving of hot liquid. But it took time. It was almost an hour afterward that the group resumed its activities, this time under the direction of Summers and McClave, who had assumed leadership when it was most desperately needed. Summers claimed that Goman overcorrected the route in order to avoid a canyon, giving him the compass near the front of the line and setting it to a heading that was 20 degrees off course. But, instead of going downward, the climbers were going almost exactly sideways, across the mountain's face. Summers became concerned as they continued because he saw a crack in the snow and assumed they might be traveling across the White River Glacier. Crossing a glacier is dangerous because crevasses are hard to spot, making it dangerous to cross. Blowing snow causes mechanical hardening during a blizzard, which allows it to build up in caps, or bridges, over voids. Stepping on these bridges can cause them to collapse. Around 7 p.m., visibility was less than 10 feet, and winds were getting stronger. After leading the group past the crack, Summers went ahead. Suddenly, he felt his foot go over an edge abruptly. Then he saw another crevasse, which looked to be 30 feet deep. They were at an elevation of 8,200 feet at the edge of the glacier. Portland Mountain Rescue was contacted in the early hours of Tuesday, May 13, about the missing student climbers. At 5:21 a.m., they reached the Timberline Lodge. The ground crew from the Air Force Pararescue Unit 304th Recovery Squadron arrived at 8:53. The Sheriff's Department set up a staging area and dispatched searchers into the inclement weather. They couldn't find anything. After all, since helicopters were unable to fly due to the whiteout, they had no idea where to look. The volunteers had a hard time seeing or hearing anything as they searched through the worst of the storm. The wind was howling and snow kept piling up. Visibility was rarely more than a few arms' length. The winds were 103 miles per hour on the first day of the rescue. It became evident right away that the rescuers would be putting their lives in danger merely by venturing outside into the maelstrom. The winds were so strong on the first day of the search that they overturned a snowcat. Meanwhile, Ralph Summers managed to dig a snow cave with Goman. It measured 8 feet by 6 feet, with 4 feet tall. Students then crawled inside one by one, and they realized it wasn't big enough for 13 people. Soon, the walls of cave began to melt with all the body heat, and a shallow pool of water formed on the cave floor. On account of cave being small, they all took turns sitting outside the cave in the wind. Goman volunteered to stay outside first, even though he was already shaking. They struggled to keep the cave's entrance open because of piling snow. The shovel and the sleeping bag were swept away by the wind outside the cave entrance at some point during the night. The students had to use an ice axe and move inside and outside of the cave to try to keep the entrance clear without the shovel. On Tuesday morning, situation was very grim. Summers made the decision to leave in order to get help. Molly Shula, one of the experienced climbers, volunteered. Soon, they disappeared into the whiteout. They continued on even though they didn't realize that they are going in the wrong direction. But around 9:50 a.m., they made it to Mount Hood Meadows, a ski resort approximately 2 miles east of Timberline Lodge. The storm didn't let up, and the condition of 11 people who were still in the cave kept getting worse. It was painful to breathe, and with each new snowfall, the mouth of the cave was getting smaller. At some point, on Tuesday night, Allison Litzenberger decided to step outside to clear the entrance. There was still a lot of snowfall. The entrance to the cave was all but sealed. She was small, so she was able to make her way into the raging storm. Eric Sandvik and Aaron O'Leary followed behind her, but when Sandvik attempting to re-enter the cave, he was only able to get one boot back through the opening. In a day, 4 feet of snow had fell, and the cave's mouth was now practically sealed. 8 people were inside, now buried beneath a thick layer of snow, while 3 students were stranded outside. Wednesday morning weather was clear. One rescue group traveled up the mountainside in a snowcat from Mount Hood Meadows at around 2 in the morning. The group had to spend hours holed up in places, exposed to the elements and storm's gusts. At 5:45 a.m., after sunrise, they noticed 2 black dots on the side of the White River Canyon area. They immediately went over, and they were faced with sight of 2 seemingly lifeless bodies lying in the snow. One was directly above the other, at the foot of the hill, in the fetal position. In a position where they'd curled to stay warm. It was Aaron O'Leary and Allison Litzenberger. Soon around the same spot, a different group of rescuers discovered Eric Sandvik's body. Sandvik had collapsed onto the snow after attempting to re-enter the cave through its opening. Rescuers called for a helicopter to retrieve the bodies. A helicopter from the 304th Recovery Squadron took off from the operations base and flew up to the location where the students were discovered. Due to some communication error, for a long while, both law enforcement officers and media personnel believed that the 3 were still alive. Finally, the helicopter landed in a parking lot. The crew unloaded the bodies and placed them on the ground. Then 2 deputies drove the bodies away. After Summers went up in a helicopter to pinpoint the cave's location, the search was redirected to that location. Later on that, Richard Harder, a master sergeant with the 304th Recovery Squadron, determined that the search teams were looking in the wrong area, marked a probable search field with a flare from a helicopter, and set up a line of rescuers to use avalanche poles to search for survivors. Later that afternoon, a team of searchers, including Summers, established a probe line. The rescuers began at 8,500 feet and proceeded slowly down the slope, spacing themselves roughly 3 feet apart and driving 10-foot avalanche poles into the snow. It was a desperate last resort that proved effective. Just 22 minutes before the search was supposed to conclude that day, at 5:38 p.m., a rescuer hit something with probing rod. Everyone immediately started digging, and soon they hit the hollow space. It was the cave. When one of them put their head inside, they could hear a weak moan. Inside the cramped cave, directly below Giles Thompson at the now sealed entrance, Brenton Clark was visible. She was moaning, semi-conscious. Giles Thompson's condition was even worse, but they both would survive. The victims were rushed to the Portland area's medical facilities by helicopters. Doctors tried their hardest, but with limited success. Despite their best efforts, doctors were unable to save Thompson's legs, but he survived along with Brenton Clark. But others were not so fortunate: Tasha Amy, 15, Richard Heater Jr., 15, Allison Litzenberger, 15, Susan McClave, 17, Patrick McGinnis, 15, Aaron O'Leary, 15, Eric Sandvik, 15, Thomas Goman, 42, and Marion Horwell, 40 had perished on this tragedy. The grim toll of the tragedy reverberated throughout the climbing community. More than 50 lives have been lost on the mountain since the first recorded death of a climber in 1896. The worst previous tragedy occurred in June 1981, when 5 people died. The school commissioned an official inquest, which assigned blame primarily to Goman for failing to turn back in the face of bad weather. Settlements were offered to the families of 7 students who died, and one family filed a wrongful death lawsuit in September 1986. The school commemorates the event annually in May of each year. So that's all we got about the Mount Hood tragedy, and thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button, and if you have something to say, please leave a comment.